first sign that someone had crossed Clara Bellamy's yard in the night was not a footprint. It was the wood. Fresh-cut pine lay stacked beside her back step, neat as church pews, high enough to last a week. The ends were pale and clean. Snow steamed from the bark, as if warm hands had carried it there only minutes before. But Clara's door had been bolted from the inside, and the winter trail to town had been buried for 3 days. In 1879, the Black Hills could make a woman disappear without ever raising its voice. Snow filled the gullies. Wind erased wagon ruts by morning. By January, the world around Clara's cabin had become a white, silent bowl, with the pines standing close together like men who knew too much and said nothing. She had lived there alone since the fever took Samuel on the road to Deadwood. 22 months was long enough for neighbors to stop inviting her to socials, long enough for the preacher's wife to stop leaving bread at the door, long enough for Clara to learn that silence did not stay outside a house. It came in. It sat at the table. It slept beside you. Most nights, she kept only one lamp burning in the front window, not because she expected anyone to find the cabin, but because darkness pressed too close when there was no other living breath in the room. That evening, the storm arrived before supper. Wind pushed snow sideways across the clearing while Clara stood at the stove, stirring beans in an iron pot. The cabin walls creaked. The roof shuddered. Somewhere beyond the glass, the horse in the lean-to stamped hard against the boards. Then Clara felt it. Not a sound, not a movement. A knowing in the skin. She turned slowly toward the window. At first, the storm showed her nothing but white. Then the lantern flame bent behind her, and its reflection shifted off the glass. A man stood at the edge of the pines. He was 40 paces from the cabin, tall and still in a dark winter robe, with snow gathering across his shoulders. Beside him stood a black horse, head lowered, breath drifting silver in the cold. Clara's hand tightened around the spoon. The man did not wave. He did not come closer. He did not reach for the long rifle bound to his saddle. He only watched the cabin, not like a thief, not like a drunk from town. Worse than that, like someone willing to wait. Moonlight touched his face just enough for Clara to see the hard line of his cheek, the long black braid over one shoulder, and eyes so steady they seemed untouched by the storm around him. She should have killed the lamp. She should have barred the shutter and stepped back into the dark. Instead, she stood where the firelight could find her. The man lifted his gaze to the window, and Clara felt the look land on her as plainly as a hand against glass. For nearly 2 years, men had looked through her. They saw a widow, a nuisance, a poor claim, a woman too proud to ask for help and too alone to refuse it. This stranger looked as if he saw the locked door inside her. Clara stepped back so fast the spoon struck the floor. But even from the shadowed corner of the room, she could feel him outside, still and patient beneath the falling snow. And for the first time since Samuel died, the loneliness in Clara Bellamy's chest did not feel empty. It felt witnessed. She barely slept. All night the storm scraped its nails along the roof, while Clara lay beneath 2 quilts with her eyes open. Every gust sounded like a step. Every crackle in the hearth sent her gaze toward the frosted window. She told herself she was listening for danger. By dawn, she knew that was only half true. She wanted to know if he had stayed. When morning came, the storm had gone quiet. Blue light lay over the clearing, turning the snow into polished bone. Clara wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crossed the cold floorboards to the window. The pines stood empty. The man was gone. Her first feeling was relief. Her second frightened her more. Disappointment. She spent the morning angry at herself. She broke ice from the water bucket, fed the mare, swept snow from the porch, mended a tear in her sleeve with such tight stitches the thread snapped twice. Yet every task ended the same way, her eyes drifting back to the tree line. By afternoon, she found the wood. Clara stood over the stack beside the back door, her breath caught halfway in her throat. No neighbor could have reached her cabin through those drifts. No peddler would have chopped this much pine and vanished without asking payment. She knelt and touched one split log. It was not warm from fire. It was warm from being carried. A shiver moved through her that had nothing to do with winter. Fresh tracks led away from the door, the deep prints of a large horse, circling wide around the cabin, never once crossing the porch. Close enough to leave wood, close enough to look in the window, close enough to lift the latch if he had wanted to. But he had not. Clara stared at the tracks until the cold burned through her skirt. The men in town knocked too loudly. They spoke as if her silence were an invitation to fill the room. They asked whether she planned to sell, whether she needed a husband, whether a woman alone understood what winter could do. The man in the storm had asked nothing. He had left her warmth and disappeared. That night, Clara did something she could not explain. She cleaned the front lamp glass with the hem of her apron until it shone clear. Then she set the lamp in the window before sundown and lit it early. When the flame rose, small and gold against the blue dark, Clara told herself it was for travelers. But there were no travelers in that weather. Only one pair of eyes she could no longer pretend she was not looking for. 3 nights passed. On the 4th, snow began falling straight down, soft and endless, making the world outside the window look suspended. Clara sat by the hearth with Samuel's old Bible open in her lap, though she had not read a single word. The mare shifted in the lean-to. Clara's breath stopped. She set the book aside and went to the window. He was there. The black horse stood beside him like a shadow cut from the same storm. The man's robe was dusted white. His braid lay dark against his chest. He had not moved closer than before. Still, the cabin felt different the moment she saw him. Not safe exactly. Too alive to be safe. Clara raised one hand to the curtain, meaning to pull it closed. Instead, her fingers stayed where they were. His eyes lifted. The distance between them did not change, yet the room seemed to shrink around her. She became painfully aware of the lamp beside her, the loose auburn hair at her neck, the small tear in her sleeve she had mended badly that morning. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he lowered his gaze first. The gesture startled her. It was not shyness, not weakness. Permission. He was letting her choose whether to be seen. Something inside Clara tightened so sharply she had to press her hand against the window frame. Most men entered a room before a woman could decide whether to open the door. This one stood in a blizzard and gave her the power to turn away. Clara did not turn away. A week later, she found the pump handle wrapped in rawhide so her fingers would not freeze to the metal. 2 mornings after that, the loose hinge on the stable gate had been fixed with a strip of hammered tin. When heavy snow bent the north fence, someone propped it before the mare could wander into the ravine. Always before dawn, always without a knock, always close enough to help and careful enough not to claim credit. Clara began measuring Winter by the proof he left behind: a repaired latch, dry kindling tucked beneath the eaves, a narrow path broken through the deepest drift from the cabin to the lean-to. Each kindness should have frightened her. Instead, it unsettled her in a deeper place, because the more he did without asking, the harder it became to believe she had truly been alone. By mid-January, Clara stopped pretending the lamp was for strangers. She filled it before sunset. She trimmed the wick. She placed it in the front window where the glow could cross the clearing and touch the trees. Some nights he came, some nights he did not. On the nights he did, Clara felt the change before she saw him. The air inside the cabin grew watchful. The fire seemed brighter. Her own body betrayed her, pulse rising as if it had recognized him before her mind would allow it. Once, near noon, she saw him clearly. She was kneading bread at the table when movement near the frozen creek drew her eyes upward. The man stood beside his horse, tightening a strap on the saddle. Daylight showed what night had hidden: broad shoulders beneath dark hide, copper-brown skin weathered by cold, black hair braided tight down his back, and a face carved by patience rather than cruelty. He looked up. Clara froze with both hands buried in dough. Across 60 feet of snow, his gaze found hers with the calm force of a spoken name. Her breath turned shallow. She had been afraid of him because he was unknown. Now she feared something worse, that some part of her had begun to know him. A sound escaped from the kettle, sharp and thin. Clara flinched, breaking the gaze. When she looked back, he had placed one gloved hand on his horse's neck. His expression had softened so slightly she might have imagined it. Then he turned and vanished into the pines. The cabin felt colder when he was gone. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Clara understood that loneliness was not the worst thing a person could feel. Missing someone was worse, because missing meant hope had found a place to grow. The storm that changed everything came on a moonless night. It started after midnight with a crash of wind that shook frost from the rafters. Snow slammed against the windows in white fists. The mare screamed once from the lean-to, a sound so panicked, Clara sat up in bed with her heart pounding. For several seconds she listened, then she heard the horse outside. Not her mare, another. Clara threw on her coat and ran to the front window. Nothing but snow. Then lightning flashed behind the ridge, turning the clearing silver for one violent heartbeat. The black horse stood near her porch rail. Alone. Clara was at the door before thought could stop her. Wind burst into the cabin, snatching heat from the room. She grabbed the lantern and stepped into the storm. "Hello?" The word vanished. Snow struck her face so hard her eyes watered. The horse tossed its head, reins dragging. Its saddle was dark with ice. "Matto!" She did not know how she knew the name. She had heard it once in town, whispered by a freight man who claimed a Lakota rider had been seen in the hills. "Mato Red Willow," he had said, as if a man's name could be both warning and story. Now the name tore from her throat like prayer. Mato! Movement stirred near the pines. Clara lifted the lantern. A figure knelt in the snow, one hand braced against a trunk, trying and failing to rise. The world narrowed to that. Clara fought through the drifts, skirts heavy, breath tearing in her chest. When she reached him, Mato lifted his head. Snow clung to his lashes. Blood marked one side of his temple, dark against the cold. Yet his eyes, when they found hers, were still steady. That calm nearly broke her. You fool, she whispered, voice shaking. You are freezing. He tried to stand without using her. Of course he did. Clara stepped beneath his arm before pride could kill him. The instant his weight touched her shoulder, heat shot through her whole body, not from desire alone, but from the shock of discovering he was real. Not a shadow beyond glass, not a question in a storm. A man, breathing hard, alive, trying even now not to burden her. Lean on me, she said. He hesitated. Lean on me, or fall and make me drag you. Something almost like a smile crossed his mouth. Then he allowed it. Together they crossed the yard, one slow step at a time. Wind shoved at their backs. Snow filled their tracks as fast as they made them. Clara could feel the strength in him, even weakened. She could feel his restraint more. He was holding back half his weight so he would not crush her. That gentleness, in the middle of such danger, hurt worse than fear. By the time they reached the cabin, Clara's hands were numb. She pushed the door open and brought him inside. Firelight closed around them. Snow melted from his robe onto the floorboards. The black horse stamped outside the wall. The cabin, which had held only Clara's breathing for so long, suddenly felt too small for all that presence. Mato stood just inside the door, as if the threshold still mattered, as if entering did not mean he believed he had the right to stay. Clara looked up at him, hair loose, cheeks burning from cold, one hand still gripping his sleeve. For the first time, there was no window between them. The storm roared for hours. Inside, Clara fed the fire until the room glowed amber. She heated water, found clean cloth, and cleaned the cut at Mato's temple while he sat on the hearth bench with his hands open on his knees. He did not flinch. Not when the cloth touched the wound. Only when Clara's fingers brushed his skin. Then his breath changed. Barely. But Clara heard it. She became aware of everything. The wet ends of his braid, the scars across his knuckles, the shape of his hands wrapped around the chipped mug she gave him, the way he kept his eyes lowered whenever she moved too close, as though her comfort mattered more than his curiosity. You have been fixing my place, she said at last. The fire cracked between them. Mato looked toward the window where snow pressed white against the glass. It needed fixing. That is not an answer. It is the reason. Clara almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. You could have knocked. His gaze returned to her, quiet, careful. Would you have opened? The question found the truth so cleanly that Clara could not answer. No, she would not have. Not at first. Maybe not for anyone. Mato seemed to understand without needing her to say it. He looked down at the mug in his hands. I saw smoke from your chimney during the first hard snow, he said. His voice was low, roughened by cold, and steadier than the storm. Then I saw the broken fence, the empty wood rack, the one lamp burning until morning. Clara's throat tightened. "I thought you were watching me." "I was watching the winter." She looked at him. He lifted his eyes. "The winter was closer to your door than I was." The words settled in her chest with a weight that felt almost unbearable. No man had ever put distance between himself and danger for her sake. They had only warned her of danger so they could step closer. "Why?" she whispered. "Why keep coming back?" Matto was silent so long she thought he would not answer. Then he reached into the small leather pouch at his belt and drew out something wrapped in cloth. Clara went still. He opened the cloth across his palm. A blue glass comb lay there, its teeth chipped at one corner, its painted flowers worn nearly white. Clara's breath left her. "My mother's comb," she whispered. She had lost it by the creek in autumn while cutting willow branches for kindling. She had searched until her knees ached, searched even after sunset, searched as if finding that small piece of blue glass might bring back the woman who had once braided her hair by lamplight. "I found it near the water," Matto said, "before the snow." "You kept it all this time?" "I did not know if returning it would frighten you." The tenderness of that answer undid her more than any bold confession could have. Clara reached for the comb. Her fingers brushed his palm. Neither of them moved. Outside, the storm battered the walls. Inside, the whole world seemed to gather itself into the small place where her hand touched his. Matto's eyes lifted to hers. There was no hunger in them, no claim, only recognition, as if he had seen her grief and had not turned away from it. Clara closed her fingers around the comb, but she did not pull her hand back. "Why?" she asked again, softer now. Matto's voice dropped until it was nearly part of the fire. "Because I know what it is to have a house full of ghosts." Clara's eyes burned. He looked toward the window, not hiding the pain, only carrying it with the same quiet strength he carried everything else. "My wife died before the leaves turned," he said. "My little boy went with her before the first snow. After that, I rode because stopping made the ground feel too empty." Clara could not speak. All those nights she had imagined him as storm, as danger, as mystery, and all along he had been another person trying not to be swallowed by the same white silence. She set the comb in her lap and placed her hand over his. This time, he did not freeze. This time, his hand turned beneath hers, slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind. She did not. The storm softened before dawn. By then, the fire had burned low, and the cabin had changed in some quiet, irreversible way. Nothing had been promised, nothing had been taken. Yet the silence that filled the room no longer belonged to grief. It belonged to two people breathing on opposite sides of the same fire. Clara sat wrapped in a blanket, the blue glass comb resting beside her, while Matto stood and reached for his coat. The sight hurt her instantly. He fastened the strap at his wrist, checked the door, listened to the wind like a man reading a language written in weather. Then his hand touched the latch. Clara felt the old fear rise. Not fear of him, but fear of the door closing after he left. Fear of the cabin returning to what it had been. Mato. His name was barely louder than the fire, but he stopped as if she had laid a hand against his back. Slowly he turned. The look in his eyes was not triumph. It was hope, held so carefully it made her chest ache. Clara stood, still holding the blanket around her shoulders. "Will you come back?" The question trembled because it carried too much. The lamp, the wood, the storms, the trackless nights. The years she had survived by needing nothing from anyone. Mato crossed the room, not quickly, not possessively. He came as he had always come, quietly, leaving her room to choose. When he stood before her, he lowered himself to one knee. Clara's breath caught. In town, men had offered help from above her, advice from above her, pity from above her. Mato knelt as if being near her was not a favor he granted, but an honor he accepted. He lifted one hand, stopping just short of her cheek, waiting. Clara closed the distance herself. The moment his fingers touched her face, warmth moved through her so gently it felt like thawing. "I will come back," he said, "if your lamp is there." Tears blurred the firelight. Clara looked past him to the front window, where the little lantern still burned against the pale morning snow. For almost 2 years, she had lit it because she was afraid of the dark. Now she understood. Some lights were not meant to keep the night away. Some were meant to tell the right soul where to return. Mato rested his forehead against hers, and Clara let her eyes close. Outside, the black hills lay buried beneath winter. Inside, the door stood unlocked. And Clara Bellamy, who had once believed she would vanish quietly behind walls of snow and silence, finally knew what it felt like to be found.